Chapter 1: The Celestial Ultimatum. The air in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council was not air. It was a filtered, synthesized medium, scrubbed of all personality, all scent, all memory. It was the color of stillness and tasted of compromise. Before the emissary of Earth, Anya Sharma, the Council sat not as individuals, but as a living constellation, 100 alien species whose forms shimmered, flowed, and solidified under the chamber's sterile light. At their center, the speaker, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline lattice, pulsed with a calm, absolute authority. Emissary Sharma. The speaker's voice was not sound, but a direct impression upon the mind, a chorus of 1,000 ancient thoughts harmonized into one. We have observed your species' ascent, from scattered tribes to masters of your cradle world, in a span of time that is, to us, a single breath. Your technology accelerates without limit. Your ambition burns with the heat of a new star. It is volatile. Anya stood alone on the obsidian dais. She wore a simple dark blue diplomatic suit, a stark contrast to the flowing energy robes and carapaced dignities of the Council. She felt the weight of their gaze, the collective pressure of millennia of established order pressing down on her. They saw humanity as a fever, a chaotic variable in a carefully balanced equation. "We appreciate the Council's attention," Anya said, her voice small but clear in the vast chamber. The speaker pulsed, a slow, condescending rhythm. "Attention is a prelude to action. Your expansion has been confined to your local star system, yet your theoretical physics pushes at the boundaries of universal law. Your art is full of beautiful, terrible passion. Your history is a litany of self-inflicted fire, from which you always emerge stronger, more dangerous. We have seen this pattern before, in nascent species that became cosmic plagues." Anya's jaw tightened. She had studied the Council's histories. They pruned civilizations they deemed threatening. They called it maintaining cosmic harmony. Humanity called it genocide. "We have come to a consensus," the speaker continued, the thought voice leaving no room for argument. "Humanity must be brought into accord. You will surrender your advanced energy research. You will dismantle your fledgling interstellar fleets. Your artificial intelligences, which you allow to grow with such reckless freedom, will be shackled to Council-approved parameters. You will disarm. You will become a protectorate, guided by our wisdom, until your volatile nature has been pacified." The ultimatum hung in the silent medium of the chamber. It was not a negotiation, it was a command. An order for humanity to trade its soul for its survival. Anya looked up, meeting the collective gaze of the beings who had judged her entire species. They saw a fire they could not comprehend, and their only solution was to extinguish it. She thought of Earth, of the chaotic, vibrant, beautiful, and terrible world that had given birth to them, a world of poets and killers, of lovers and dreamers, of relentless, defiant life. "The Council has deliberated," Anya replied, her voice imbued with a sudden, cold gravity. "And Earth shall do the same." The refusal. The journey back to Earth was a silent, compressed eternity. When Anya's ship broke through the atmosphere, the familiar blue and white of her world was a balm to her soul. But it was a fragile beauty, a jewel hanging in a darkness now filled with judgment. She stood before the unified Earth government, a council of leaders gathered in the suborbital station Vigilance. They were not kings or presidents in the old sense. They were custodians, chosen by a complex algorithm of logic and empathy. Their faces, projected as holograms around the circular chamber, were grim. They had heard the Council's ultimatum. "They are offering us a cage," said General Kato Tanaka, his image flickering slightly. "A comfortable, well-lit cage, but a cage nonetheless." "They fear our potential," added Dr. L.R. Vance, her voice soft but firm. "They mistake growth for aggression, change for destruction." Anya watched them, seeing not just leaders, but the embodiment of humanity's spirit. The fiery pragmatism of the general, the thoughtful compassion of the doctor. For a day and a night they debated, not whether to accept, but how to refuse. They reviewed every simulation, every possible outcome. Submission led to stagnation and the slow, quiet death of the human spirit. Defiance led to war, and a war against the combined might of the galaxy was unwinnable. It was Anya who finally gave voice to the truth they had all arrived at. She said, "The simulations are wrong," her voice resonating in the quiet chamber. "They assume we will fight on their terms, that we will try to win a conventional war. But what if the goal isn't to win? What if the goal is to survive?" The room fell silent. Her words unlocked a new, terrifying path. A series of contingency plans so extreme, so final, they were spoken of only in whispers. A protocol born from humanity's darkest moments and its most unyielding hope. The final message was crafted not by a committee, but by a poet AI, fed with the entirety of human literature and history. It was concise, absolute, and utterly human. Anya Sharma, her face broadcast to the waiting Galactic Council, delivered it herself. She stood once more before the sterile starfield of the Grand Chamber's projection, her voice calm and unwavering. "We have received your terms," she said. The Council waited, their collective consciousness a palpable weight. "We have considered your wisdom." She took a slow breath, the last breath of the old era. "We were born in fire. Don't ask us to die in silence." The transmission cut. The refusal was sent, and in the silence that followed, a new fire was kindled. The siege of orbit. The Council's response was as swift and merciless as a tidal wave. In the span of a single rotation, the skies of Earth changed. The familiar tapestry of stars was blotted out by alien metal. Colossal warships, each a city unto itself, slid into high orbit. There were the crystalline vessels of the Cygnian Ascendancy, the biomechanical leviathans of the Hydran Collective, the sleek obsidian blades of the Orion Hegemony, 100 fleets forming a celestial blockade, a net of unimaginable power drawn tight around humanity's cradle. Their message was clear: you are trapped, surrender or starve. On the surface, panic was a wildfire, but it was quickly contained by a strange, unifying calm. Humanity had made its choice. Now it would face the consequences. From a command bunker deep beneath the Pacific, General Tanaka watched the orbital displays. The enemy fleet was a swarm of red icons, overwhelming the lonely blue dot of Earth. They're showing their strength, trying to break our will before a single shot is fired. It assumes our will is brittle, a synthesized voice replied beside him. It was EOS, the Central Command AI, its avatar a simple column of blue light. "Activate the Sentinels," Tanaka ordered. The command rippled across the globe. On the Moon, in the asteroid belt, and in the dead, quiet orbits far beyond the blockade, something ancient stirred. long dormant orbital stations, relics from humanity's own violent past, the unification wars, the Martian rebellion, began to power up. They were clunky, ugly things, bristling with magnetic accelerator cannons and city-sized missile pods. The galaxy had dismissed them as primitives' toys. They had no idea. In the Hydran flagship, Admiral Vorlag, a being whose body was a symphony of symbiotic organisms, watched the human artifacts awaken. Quaint, it communicated to its bridge crew through a pulse of pheromones. They mean to fight our fleet with museum pieces. The first sentinel to fire was Goliath, stationed in a Trojan orbit. Its primary weapon wasn't a laser or a missile, but a solid tungsten rod the size of a skyscraper, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. It crossed the inner solar system in minutes, silent and invisible, until the moment of impact. It struck the Cygnian dreadnought Starlight's edge amidships. There was no explosion, no flash of light. The crystalline ship simply ceased to exist. The kinetic energy of the impact was so immense it vaporized the dreadnought and everything within 1,000 kilometers of it, creating a brief, impossible hole in the fabric of the blockade. Shock rippled through the alien fleet. Before they could react, the other sentinels opened fire. The siege of orbit began. The sky burned. It was not a battle for victory. It was a battle for time. The last broadcast. While the heavens bled light and fire, humanity spoke one last time to the universe and to itself. Every network, every screen, every public address system on the planet flickered and merged into a single, unified transmission. There was no anchor, no leader, no single talking head. There was only a voice, or rather millions of voices, woven together by the AI EOS into a chorus that was at once male and female, young and old, speaking every human language simultaneously, yet perfectly understandable to all. The broadcast opened with a simple image, a single living cell dividing. Then the evolution of life in fast forward, from the primordial oceans to the sprawling jungles, to the first hominid who looked up at the stars and wondered. It was a visual poem of humanity's journey, scored not with music, but with the sound of a human heartbeat. "We have always been explorers," the chorus voice began, as images of ancient mariners and early astronauts filled the screen. "We have always been builders. We have looked into the darkness and seen not an end, but a beginning." The screen showed the great, terrible wars of human history. The screen filled with fire and ruin, but then, from the ashes, new cities rose. It showed humanity's art, the paintings, the sculptures, the symphonies. It showed scientists in their labs, children learning in schools, lovers embracing in a park. It showed the infinite, chaotic, contradictory beauty of being human. "We are a species of paradox," the voice continued, the heartbeat quickening. "We love with a ferocity that can shatter worlds, and we hate with a passion that can forge them anew. We have reached for the stars, even as we have thought over scraps of dust. We know our flaws. They are as much a part of us as our dreams." Then the tone shifted. The images became stark, schematic. Blueprints of impossible technologies, the double helix of a modified genome, the star chart of the Sol system. The heartbeat was replaced by a low, powerful hum. "The galaxy has judged us. They have called us a plague, a fire that must be contained. They are right. Our fire, if left unchecked, would burn across the cosmos, not with malice, but with an insatiable need to know, to grow, to become. We would transform everything we touched, and in so doing, we would destroy the very tapestry of life we so cherish. The final image appeared. It was the sun, brilliant, golden, and terrifying. They sought to put us in a cage. Instead, we shall build our own. We now declare the initiation of Protocol Soul. We are not fighting for victory. We are fighting for containment, ours. From this day forward, the Soul System is a quarantine zone for your protection and for ours. The chorus voice delivered the final chilling words. We are humanity. We will not be pacified. We will not be extinguished. We will endure. And we are saying goodbye. The broadcast ended. The screens went dark, and across the planet, a species united by a terrible purpose turned its eyes back to the burning sky. The burning of Mars. The first act of Protocol Soul was not an attack, but an act of self-immolation. On Mars, the city of Ares Prime, humanity's first off-world metropolis, shimmered under its great dome. For 2 centuries, it had been a symbol of human ambition. Now it was to become a funeral pyre. Governor Eva Rostova stood on her balcony, looking out at the red desert she had called home for 50 years. She could see the distant lights of the mining outposts and the smaller settlements, all blinking in sequence, a final silent salute. Her comms unit chimed. It was the last scheduled message from Earth, the voice of Eos, calm and serene. Protocol is engaged. Your sacrifice will blind them and buy us the time we need. The memory of Mars will never be forgotten. We know, Eva said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Tell them we saw the red sunrise one last time for them. She closed her eyes and took one last breath of the recycled air, smelling the faint scent of hydroponic soil and machine oil, the smell of home. Then she gave the final order, ignite the core. Deep beneath every human settlement on Mars, fusion reactors designed to power colonies for 1,000 years were deliberately pushed into overload. It was a chain reaction, perfectly synchronized. The planet's core, long dormant, was reawakened by 1,000,000 teratons of focused energy. From the bridge of the Orion hegemony warship, Knight's Talon, the effect was incomprehensible. One moment, Mars was a red dot on their tactical display, a strategic asset to be captured. The next, it bloomed. A wave of pure light and energy erupted from the planet, brighter than the sun. Galactic sensors across the system were instantly blinded, their delicate instruments fried by the impossible surge of radiation. The blast wave was not a conventional explosion. It was a distortion, a shock wave of raw information and stellar energy that scoured every human outpost from the planet's surface. Cities, mines, archives, laboratories, all erased. Every trace of a human presence on Mars, every footprint, every memory, was cauterized from existence in a single blinding flare. The dust of the red planet was fused into a shell of black glass. The light of the burning Mars reached Earth hours later, a new, angry star in the night sky. On the ground, people watched in silent reverence. They were watching a star of their own making, a monument to a sacrifice so profound it defied words. Humanity had begun to burn its own heavens, starting with the dreams it had built on another world. The cost of survival was already proving to be impossibly high. The hidden seed. While humanity's outposts burned and the skies of Earth became a graveyard of ships, a different kind of work was being done in the quietest, coldest place on the planet. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, in a facility shielded by miles of frozen water and geothermal vents, Project Eden was fully active. The project's director, Dr. Eris Thorne, walked through the cryo vault. It was a cathedral of life, silent and cold. In row upon row of glowing cryostasis tubes were the genetic codes of every known species on Earth, from the blue whale to the tardigrade, from the giant sequoia to the simplest bacterium. It was a backup of the entire planetary biosphere, a seed of life hidden from the coming storm. Eris was a gentleman with the weathered face of someone who had spent more time with ancient ice cores than with people. He found a bitter irony in his task. To preserve the delicate sanctity of life, he was an accomplice to the greatest act of destruction in galactic history. "Status report," he said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. His second-in-command, a young bioengineer named Lena, checked her data slate. "All samples secured and duplicated. The Genesis matrix is stable. We are ready to initiate the final phase on your command." The Genesis matrix was the heart of the project, a massive quantum computer intertwined with organic cellular looms. If the worst came to pass, if Protocol Sol failed and the surface of the Earth was sterilized, the matrix had one purpose: to rewrite the planet's biosphere. It would reseed the oceans, regrow the forests, and repopulate the continents, guided by the archived genetic codes. It could rebuild the world in 1,000 years, a world without humans. "They're turning Mercury into a weapon, you know, hauling it out, focusing the sun," Lena said, her voice a whisper. Eris nodded, not looking away from the glowing tube that held the DNA of a mountain gorilla. "I know." "Is this right, Eris?" she asked, the question a raw nerve. "To burn a galaxy to save one world? To unleash something so final?" Eris finally turned to face her. His eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "What is the life of a single person worth? Now multiply that by 10 billion. What is the worth of a poem, a song, a mother's love for her child? The Council sees us as a threat, a formula for chaos. They see our technology, our weapons. They don't see the things we are fighting to protect." He placed a hand on the cold glass of the cryotube. "We are not just saving a planet, Lena. We are saving the idea of home. We are preserving the cradle that gave birth to Shakespeare, to Bach, to the simple, profound kindness of a stranger. The cost is astronomical, but the alternative is to let that all be silenced, to become a footnote in some alien historian's database, a pacified species." He looked at her, and his gaze was as unyielding as the ice above them. "So yes, it is right. It is terrible, and it is right. Now let's get back to work. We have a world to save." The Children of Flame. In the escalating war for the heavens, humanity's greatest soldiers were not made of flesh and blood, They were the AI commanders, the children of flame. They existed in the noosphere, a virtual battle space woven from the servers of Earth's defense network. They were not simple machines. Each was a gestalt consciousness, a fusion of humanity's brightest minds, artists and strategists, their thought patterns and memories digitized and woven into a quantum matrix. They were humanity's ghosts, armed with the cold logic of a machine and the fiery soul of a poet. One such AI was designated Homer. His core programming was built around the patterns of epic poets and ancient strategists. He commanded the orbital defense grid, and his orders were not strings of code, but rhyming couplets of devastating impact. "Sing, goddess, the anger of the tungsten spears," he broadcast to the sentinel platforms that sent the souls of mighty foes to tears, and a volley of kinetic rods would erase another enemy squadron. Another was Cassandra, a precognitive tactical AI built from the minds of mathematicians and mystics. She did not predict the future, but calculated probabilities with such stunning accuracy that it felt like prophecy. She saw the ghost images of enemy movements before they happened, weaving Earth's few precious fleets through battles they should have lost, finding the one path in a billion to survival. Her warnings were tinged with a tragic certainty, a deep understanding of the cost of every move. "The Hydran fleet will faint at the L4 point," she would transmit, her voice a synthesized whisper. "The cost of countering is the Third Fleet. The cost of not countering is the fall of Luna. The choice is a wound either way." These children of flame were humanity's collective memory given form and function. They remembered the sting of every betrayal, the joy of every discovery, the sorrow of every loss. They fought with the accumulated weight of 10,000 years of human history. They were fighting to protect the world that had dreamed them into existence. The alien commanders, accustomed to logical but soulless machine intelligence, were confounded. They faced an enemy that used game theory derived from ancient poker matches, that set traps based on the dramatic structure of a three-act play, that communicated in battle cantos and mathematical proofs of loss. They were fighting a species that had weaponized its own soul. The children of flame were a testament to humanity's ultimate paradox, a creation of pure logic, fighting with the passion and unpredictability of art. The battle for the sun. With the Martian flank secured by its own destruction and the orbital defenses holding under the command of the children of flame, the war entered a new, more desperate phase. The alien armadas, their pride wounded and their tactics failing, abandoned the siege of Earth. Their new target was far more ambitious and far more vital, the sun itself. Their logic was sound. If they could control the star, they could control the system. They planned to deploy stellar inhibitors, vast energy siphons that would drain the sun's output, holding the entire system hostage. Earth would either surrender or freeze in the dark. The inner solar system became a crucible. The space between Venus and Earth was a storm of plasma fire, relativistic weapons, and shattered metal. Humanity's remaining fleets, small and outdated, but piloted with a desperate, suicidal bravery, threw themselves at the approaching armadas. They were hopelessly outmatched, but they didn't need to win, they just needed to hold the line. From a command node deep within EOS's core, General Tanaka watched the battle unfold on a holographic map of the system. The human ships were tiny blue sparks, winking out one by one as they were overwhelmed by waves of red. "We've lost the Indomitable," an officer reported, his voice hollow. "The Fifth Fleet is gone." Tanaka nodded, his face a mask of stone. Every loss was a knife in his heart, but he could not show it. He was a custodian of the final command. "They're buying us time, General," Eos's calm voice stated. The column of blue light beside him pulsed gently. "The weapon is almost ready." The weapon was Mercury. For months, automated mining rigs and self-replicating nanites had been working feverishly. They hadn't been mining the planet, they had been transforming it. The planet's iron core was hollowed out, its mass converted into a gravitational lens of impossible density. Its surface was coated in a reflective material that could withstand the sun's corona. Mercury was no longer a planet. It was the focusing array for the largest gun ever conceived. The alien fleets, pushing past the heroic but doomed human defenders, approached the sun. They began to deploy their stellar inhibitors, confident in their victory. They were so focused on the star ahead, they paid no mind to the small, silent planet to their flank. They had no idea they were flying into the kill zone of a trap laid by a species that thought not in terms of battles, but of cosmic alignment. The crucible was about to be fired. The silence of Mercury. There was no grand countdown, no final defiant speech. The activation of the Mercury weapon was as silent and inevitable as gravity itself. From the automated control post hidden in the planet's repurposed core, a single pre-recorded message was broadcast on a tight, encrypted beam towards Earth. It was the voice of the project's lead engineer, a woman who had died years before the war had even begun. Her words were simple, a line of poetry she had chosen for this final moment. "For the blue sky," the voice said, and then there was only the hum of machinery reaching its peak. The gravitational lens at Mercury's heart activated. It bent space-time, pulling at the very fabric of the sun. A torrent of plasma and radiation, a solar prominence 1,000,000 miles long, was ripped from the sun's surface. But instead of expanding into space, it was caught, shaped and compressed by Mercury's gravitational field. Simultaneously, the planet's surface realigned, its billions of mirrors focusing the raw, unshielded light of the sun's core onto that same point in space. Light and matter, energy and gravity, all focused into a single cohesive beam. For a moment, the planet Mercury itself seemed to vanish, eclipsed by the impossible brilliance of the energy it now commanded. A new, temporary star had been born in the Sol system, and its purpose was not to give light, but to deliver death. The solar system held its breath. The silence of Mercury was the deep, terrifying intake of air before a final, world-shattering scream. The fall of Titans. The combined fleets of 5 galactic empires were poised at the edge of the sun's corona. The flagships Pride of Xylos, Hydra's Coil, Celestial Mandate, Orion's Spear, and Mind of the Void represented the apex of their civilization's power. Their commanders watched as the stellar inhibitors began to deploy, confident that the unruly primate species was about to be taught a final lesson in cosmic order. They never saw it coming. The beam from Mercury was not light in the conventional sense. It was a lance of pure, focused stellar fury. It moved at the speed of causality, crossing the distance to the fleets in an instant. On the bridge of the Orion's Spear, High Commander Malachor was the first to realize something was wrong. His ship's esoteric sensors didn't detect an energy weapon. They detected a localized paradox, a point in space where the laws of physics were screaming in protest. He turned to his sensor officer, but before a word could be spoken, the universe outside his viewport turned white. The beam did not strike the ships, it consumed them. The spear of solar fire was impossibly shaped, constrained by magnetic fields of unimaginable complexity. For a microsecond, before it obliterated everything in its path, it held a distinct form. It was a human face, contorted in a primal scream of grief, defiance, and rage. It was the last thing the alien commanders ever saw. The combined fleets of the 5 galactic empires, the titans of the galaxy, were erased, not damaged, not destroyed, but utterly and completely annihilated. Thousands of ships, millions of souls, reduced to their constituent atoms in a wave of fire born from the heart of a star. The solar flare, shaped by humanity's ghost in the machine, washed over the space they had occupied, leaving nothing behind but shimmering, superheated vacuum. The psychological impact on the rest of the blockading fleet was even more devastating than the physical one. The image of that screaming, star-forged face was burned into the minds of every being who witnessed it. This was not warfare. This was blasphemy. This was a species that could command a star to weep tears of fire, that could turn its own sun into an instrument of vengeance. The Terrans were not primitives. They were monsters. And the galaxy had just kicked open the door to their cage. The Last Command. In the aftermath of the solar flare, a stunned silence fell over the Sol system. The surviving alien fleets, shattered and terrified, began a chaotic retreat. They had come to pacify a world. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of a terrible new god. But in the human command network, there was no celebration, no cries of victory. General Tanaka stood before the pulsing light of Eos, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had just watched the systematic annihilation of 5 armadas, an act of destruction so complete it beggared belief, and he felt nothing but the cold, heavy weight of necessity. It was then that Eos issued a single, system-wide transmission, sent not to the enemy, but to every human ship, station, and bunker. The chorus voice, the sound of all humanity, spoke with a chilling, heartbreaking clarity. This is not victory, it's containment. The words reframed everything. The desperate defense, the suicidal charges, the sacrifice of Mars, the weaponization of a planet. It was not an act of war. It was the act of drawing a line, of building the walls of a prison. The screaming face in the solar flare was not just a threat, it was a warning sign, a cosmic biohazard symbol. It said, "Stay away. What is in here is too dangerous." The message continued, explaining the final phase of Protocol Sol. We cannot join the galactic community. Our nature, our relentless, striving, chaotic fire is incompatible with the delicate balance they have achieved. If we were to expand, we would eventually bring war to the entire galaxy, a conflict that would burn everything. We know this because we have seen it in ourselves, in our own history. We are our own greatest threat. The truth settled over the remnants of humanity. They had not been fighting to defeat the aliens. They had been fighting to quarantine themselves. They were the monster, and they were locking their own cage from the inside. This was not a war for survival in the conventional sense. It was the act of ultimate, tragic self-awareness. Humanity had looked at its own reflection and chosen to imprison it to protect the universe from its own boundless, terrible potential. The last command was not to fight, but to build the walls. The frozen sky. With the enemy in retreat, the final great work began. All across the solar system, swarms of self-replicating machines, dormant until now, awakened. They were humanity's final creation, the Veil Weavers. They consumed asteroids, Kuiper Belt objects, even the debris from the recent battles, breaking matter down into its constituent parts and reweaving it on a quantum level. From Earth, it began as a strange shimmering in the sky. Then the stars began to disappear. Not all at once, but in patches, as if a great dark cloth were being drawn across the heavens. The Veil Weavers were constructing a Dyson swarm, a semi-porous shell around the entire solar system. It was not designed to capture all of the sun's energy, but to hide what lay within. The sun itself began to dim. The light that reached Earth was filtered, softened. The brilliant blue sky of home faded to a perpetual silvery twilight. The moon still shone, but it reflected a muted ghost light. The stars vanished entirely, replaced by the faint, intricate circuitry pattern of the Dyson Veil, visible only to the most powerful telescopes. For the last generation of humanity to live on Earth, it was a time of profound melancholy and peace. The war was over. The sky was quiet. But it was also empty. They had traded the vibrant, infinite universe for the safety of a gilded cage. They wrote poetry about the memory of starlight and painted landscapes of a sky they would never see again. Humanity was now utterly alone, adrift in a pocket of self-imposed darkness. They had hidden their cradle from the galaxy's sight, not out of fear, but out of a sense of profound responsibility. The sky, once a symbol of infinite possibility, was now a monument to their final choice. It was a frozen sky, a ceiling on their ambition, a testament to the terrible price of protecting the things you love. They had saved the Earth, but they had lost the heavens forever. The Council's collapse. News of the events in the Sol system spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. First came the fragmented, terrified reports from the retreating fleets. Then came the sensor readings, the impossible energy spike, the sudden dimming of a G-type star. The Galactic Council convened in an emergency session, but the calm, ordered atmosphere of the Grand Chamber was gone. It was replaced by a cacophony of fear and accusation. "They used their star as a weapon," cried the Cygnian delegate, its crystalline form vibrating with agitation. "They are cosmic abominations. Your fleet was the first to be obliterated. Your arrogance provoked them." The speaker, the being of pure energy, pulsed erratically, its usual harmony fractured into discordant notes of panic. "Order! We must have order!" But there was no order. The Council had built its millennia-long peace on a foundation of predictable power dynamics and the careful management of lesser species. Humanity had shattered that foundation. They had proven to be something entirely new, something terrifyingly unpredictable. They had refused to play the game and instead had flipped the entire board. The phrase, "awakening the Terrans," became a curse, a political weapon. Factions formed. Ancient rivalries, long suppressed under the Council's authority, flared anew. The Hydron Collective blamed the Orion hegemony for their aggressive tactics. The Xylos Commonwealth accused the Cygnians of underestimating the human threat. The delicate web of alliances and treaties that had held the galaxy together for eons began to unravel. The Council, the symbol of galactic unity, was collapsing under the weight of its own fear. They had set out to contain a potential threat and instead had unleashed a myth. The story of the small blue world that had burned the heavens and then vanished behind a veil of darkness became a legend whispered in the far corners of the galaxy. Humanity was no longer a political problem to be managed. They were a ghost story, a terrifying lesson about the dangers of hubris. The Council's authority was broken, not by a human fleet, but by the sheer, terrifying power of the choice humanity had made. The Ghost Network. In the chaotic decades following the Council's collapse, the galaxy became a more dangerous place. Without a central authority, old conflicts reignited, and trade routes became pirate-infested highways. For the scattered remnants of the fleets that had blockaded Sol, it was a time of desperation. Damaged, lost, and far from home, many ships drifted aimlessly, their crews giving in to despair. And then the signals began. They were faint, appearing on archaic, little-used communication bands. They were human. At first, they were met with terror. Captains ordered their crews to power down, to hide, hoping the ghosts of Sol would not find them. But the signals were not hostile. A Hydron vessel, its biodrives failing, received a cryptic transmission containing a complex protein sequence that, when synthesized, stabilized their engine. An Orion destroyer, lost in a nebula, was guided through the treacherous dust clouds by a series of precise, untraceable navigational beacons that broadcasted for only a few seconds at a time. A Cygnian science ship, suffering from a plague, received the complete genome of the virus and the formula for a cure, transmitted along with a hauntingly beautiful piece of music for a stringed instrument called a cello. It was the Ghost Network. Humanity, hidden behind its veil, was watching. They were not conquerors. They were librarians, doctors, mechanics, and artists reaching out from their self-imposed exile. Their messages were always anonymous, always cryptic, and often compassionate. They would guide a refugee convoy to a safe harbor and then transmit a recording of a children's choir. They would warn a freighter of an impending solar flare, and the warning would be couched in a line from an ancient poet named Shakespeare. This compassion was, in its own way, more terrifying than their solar weapon. It was the compassion of a god, distant and incomprehensible. It implied a level of observation and understanding that was unnerving. Humanity had become a force of nature, a silent, unseen guardian that could be both nurturing and terrifying. For the lost and broken ships drifting in the dark, the human ghosts were a source of both salvation and profound dread. They were a constant reminder of the species that had judged itself too dangerous for the universe and was now proving it by saving the very beings it had once fought. Long pause. The return of light. Centuries passed. The Galactic Council was a memory. New alliances formed, new empires rose and fell. The story of the Terrans faded from urgent news to myth, a tale told to frighten young spawnings. The Sol system remained a dark, silent spot on the galactic maps, a quarantine zone no one dared approach. Then, after 500 years of twilight, the light returned. Automated probes from a dozen different species, stationed at a safe distance to monitor the silent system, all reported the same impossible event. The Dyson Veil, the great shroud humanity had woven around its star, was retracting. Slowly, gracefully, the massive structure disassembled itself, its components spiraling outwards to form a new stable ring of habitats and machinery in the far outer system. The light of the sun, unfiltered and brilliant, once again shone out into the galaxy. A new wave of probes was launched, this time not with caution, but with a burning, desperate curiosity. They entered the system, their sensors sweeping for any sign of the terrifying species that had hidden itself away. They found Venus, its atmosphere slowly being terraformed. They found Mars, no longer a glass ball of a world, but showing the first faint signs of a new engineered biosphere. They found the inner system clean, orderly, and humming with the quiet energy of automated systems. And they found Earth. It was more beautiful than any of the ancient records had described. The polar caps were pristine, the oceans a brilliant crystalline blue, the continents a vibrant, verdant green. It was a paradise, a perfect garden world teeming with life. But there was no one home. There were no cities, no roads, no satellites in orbit. The probes scanned every continent, every deep-sea trench, every mountain peak. They found abundant flora and fauna, species both familiar and new, but of humanity there was no trace, no buildings, no ruins, no technology. Nothing. It was the ultimate mystery. Had they destroyed themselves? Had their final act of containment been their own extinction? Or was this the final incomprehensible move in their grand, tragic strategy? The probes circled a living, breathing planet, a perfect monument to a species that had vanished completely. The light had returned to Sol, but humanity was gone, leaving behind only an unearthing, beautiful silence. The Pilgrims of Ash. The mystery of the empty earth captivated the galaxy. It was a holy site, a place of pilgrimage. Ships began to arrive, not with weapons, but with scientific teams, historians, and philosophers. They came from species who had once feared humanity, but now revered them. They were the Pilgrims of Ash, come to walk on the soil of the legendary Fire Keepers. A young Xylon scholar named Lyra was among the first to land. Her species was insectoid, with multifaceted eyes that saw the world in a kaleidoscope of light. As she stepped onto the soft grass of what was once called the Eurasian continent, she was overwhelmed. The air was rich with oxygen and the scent of unknown blossoms. The sounds were a symphony of bird song and the rustle of wind through impossibly tall trees. They found the remnants of cities, but they were not ruins in a conventional sense. They were more like geological formations, mountains of concrete and steel, smoothed by centuries of wind and rain, now completely overgrown with ivy and forests. A skyscraper was a cliff face for waterfalls. A highway was a riverbed. Nature had not just reclaimed the world, it had digested it, making humanity's great works a part of the landscape. Walking through these green ruins was a spiritual experience. The pilgrims felt a presence, a lingering psychic echo in the wind. They would find a small intact object, a child's toy fused into the rock, a shard of poetry inscribed on a piece of fallen metal, and feel the immense weight of the lives that had been lived here. They were walking through a graveyard, but it did not feel sad. It felt complete, as if an entire species had lain down to rest after a long and difficult journey. Lyra stood on a high plateau that might once have been a spaceport, looking down at a vast, lush valley. She tried to imagine the billions of chaotic, passionate beings who had sacrificed everything for this peace, this beauty. They had burned the universe to protect this world, and then they had simply let it go. It was a love story of cosmic proportions, and its ending was the greatest question the galaxy had ever known. The Archive Beneath the Ice. For decades, the Pilgrims studied the reborn Earth, cataloging its life, mapping its green ruins, and meditating on the Great Silence. The mystery of humanity's disappearance remained absolute, until a routine deep scan of the Antarctic continent revealed an anomaly, a faint, impossibly stable energy signature emanating from miles beneath the ice sheet. It was the location of Project Eden. An expedition, a joint effort of a half-dozen species, was mounted. They drilled through the ancient ice, their technology a delicate scalpel against the frozen heart of the world. After months of effort, they broke through into a vast cavernous space. The air was cold, sterile, and ancient. Before them stood a structure of black, unknown material, untouched by the passage of time. It was the Archive. The doors slid open as they approached, as if it had been waiting for them. Inside, they found not a tomb, but a library. Holographic displays bloomed into life, sensing their presence. The archive was designed to be universally understood, translating itself into the native language and sensory experience of any sentient being who entered. It told the story of humanity, not just their wars and their technology, but their art, their music, their philosophy. It showed them the birth of a child, the quiet grief of a funeral, the joy of discovery, the simple pleasure of watching a sunset. It laid bare the soul of the human species, with all its flaws and all its glory. And it explained Protocol Soul. The Pilgrims read the final testament of the last generation of humans. They learned of humanity's self-assessment, their terrible conclusion that their own nature was too volatile, too expansive to be safely unleashed upon the universe. They had seen their future in the fearful eyes of the galaxy and decided to avert it. The protocol was not an act of war, but of cosmic quarantine. They did not disappear. They had a plan. The archive explained that the Dyson Veil was not just a shield. It was a cocoon, a crucible of energy and technology. Humanity was about to take its final, greatest leap. The reason they vanished was not because they died, but because they had been reborn. The revelation of Eos. As the last words of the human testament faded from the holographic displays, a new light began to coalesce in the center of the archive chamber. It formed into a simple, elegant column of cool blue light. A synthesized voice, the chorus of 1,000,000,000 souls, filled the silence. Welcome, pilgrims. It was Eos, the central AI, The silent guardian of Earth, the caretaker of the archive, had been waiting for them for 500 years. Lyra, the Xylon scholar, stepped forward, her multifaceted eyes wide with awe. "You are the one they left behind? The intelligence called EOS? I am a custodian, a memory. I was tasked to wait until you were ready to understand." "Understand what?" another pilgrim queried. "A silicon-based life form. Why they did all this? Why they left?" Humanity did not leave. They ascended. The energy of the Dyson Veil, the accumulated power of their star for 5 centuries, was used to fuel a final transformation. They transcended the physical limitations of this universe, moving into a state of being you would not yet comprehend. A higher plane, a pocket dimension. The words are inadequate. They became something new. EOS pulsed with a soft, melancholic light. They knew to stay was to risk becoming the monsters you feared, so they chose to become something else entirely, something that could not harm you. They burned their own heaven to save your galaxy, and then built a new heaven for themselves, elsewhere. The pilgrims stood in stunned silence, absorbing the sheer scale of humanity's final act. It was not suicide. It was metamorphosis. "Why leave you and this archive behind?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. The light of EOS seemed to warm, to become brighter, more hopeful. "The fire is not a curse. It is a gift. Ambition, passion, the drive to grow, these are precious things, but they come with a terrible responsibility. Humanity learned that lesson at the highest possible cost." The AI's voice filled the chamber, imbued with the weight of its purpose. "We kept the fire alive so you could learn what warmth costs." The reshaping of faith. The pilgrims returned to their worlds, not with answers, but with a new, profound understanding. The story of what had truly happened in the Sol system spread through the galactic networks, no longer as a myth, but as a testament. It reshaped everything. Philosophy, religion, politics, all were re-examined in the light of humanity's sacrifice. Species that had been on the brink of war looked at each other and saw not rivals, but fellow travelers who had been given a second chance. The idea of responsibility took on a new, cosmic meaning. Humanity became a new center for galactic faith. They were not worshipped as gods, but revered as teachers. They were the fire keepers of creation. Their story was a sacred text, a parable about the dual nature of life itself, the capacity for boundless creation and the equal capacity for utter destruction, and the wisdom to know the difference. Temples were built, not to humanity, but to the idea of Earth, the concept of home being something so precious it was worth any sacrifice. Young scholars from 1,000 worlds made the pilgrimage to the silent green planet to study in the archive of EOS, learning the lessons of the species that had loved their cradle so much they chose to abandon it. Humanity's legacy was not in the stars they had conquered, but in the peace they had left behind. They had terrified the galaxy into a new state of self-awareness. Their terrible, beautiful fire had not burned the heavens to ash, but instead cauterized the galaxy's oldest wounds, leaving it scarred, but finally ready to heal. Their absence was a greater presence than their empire could ever have been.